Your movie this week, Joel, is not a science fiction film, but it's perfect for our experiments. It's just bad. Tell him, Frank.
That's right. It's a diabolical cinematic. It's just bad.
This time, we watch Season 2, Episode 2, The Sidehackers.
Where we learn that only love pads the film.
But first, some follow-up.
We have a little bit of follow-up. The folks over at MST3K are going to be having a little mini convention in the Philadelphia area as part of Blobfest. The annual celebration about the movie The Blob that takes place by the theater in The Blob, where everybody runs out of the theater because the Blob has approached and so forth, and they recreate the running out of the theater as part of the festival.
Which sounds like such an exciting and fun thing to do. Oh my gosh.
It looks great. They also have a competition for Mix, as in Mr. or Ms. or whatever you want. Blobfest Universe 2023 this time around. Oh, lots of fun things happening. Lots of B-movies being shown throughout the weekend. Street fair, all that stuff. And this time, on Sunday, there's going to be the MST3Con, which is a one-day event where we're going to have a small, intimate theater with Joel, Jonah, and Emily live in person while they show 3 episodes from the new season. And for those people who are lucky enough to be in the theater, there'll be photo ops and meet and greets and a chance for a Q&A. And Charlotte, you and I will be in that theater.
I can't believe it. Actually, I'm still kind of stunned that we will be at, well, I guess it's not going to be a live version of MST3K, right? They're going to actually just show the episodes as they've been made, or are they going to be live riffing?
My understanding is that they're just going to show the episodes. There will be like a Q&A section and so forth, but there will not be live riffing, is my understanding. I could be wrong, but that's my sense of it.
Nice. Do we know which movies they're going to do yet, or is it still a surprise?
Well, they haven't told me. And I should also say, we're not there, like, officially. Like, it's not like they invited us to be there and they're paying our way. No.
No, we're just there as fans because,
exactly.
Duh, we like the show. It's sort of why we do the podcast. I know we've had to address that before because people accuse us of not actually liking the show because we don't like the episodes that they like. But,
yeah,
no, we're going as fans.
And we're going to meet Joel and Emily and Jonah. I know. And it's going to be weird.
It's going to be really weird.
I'm not sure I'm actually all that excited about that part, even though I think, they're all cool. But, whatever. It'll be all right. I'm told that for everybody, even people who haven't been spending several years recording a podcast about their work, meeting Joel is a tremendously awkward occasion.
Well, meeting me is an awkward occasion too, so, what can I say? We'll be awkward together, all of us.
So that'll be happening. If you, listener, are also going to be around for Blobfest and the MST3Con, I still don't know how I'm supposed to say that.
I know, I'm with you.
Anyway, we'll be around. I don't think we're going to be doing any sort of official event, but if there is interest, we might arrange for a meet and greet the night before or something like that. Who knows?
Or coffee with It's Just a Show.
Yeah, exactly. So keep an eye out for that and let us know. Drop us a line on Twitter or elsewhere if you're going to be there. Otherwise, let's start our engines up and maybe we should start talking about today's episode.
Oof. I don't know if I'll ever be ready to talk about Sidehackers.
This time we watched Season 2, Episode 2, The Sidehackers. Gruff and Tumble Ross Hagen stars as Rommel. Now, not the German military officer, but rather a humble bike mechanic in Southern California. Rommel is an avid participant in the new sport of sidehacking, a kind of motorcycle racing where you attach a bare-bones sidecar for a second participant to hang on to. Now, there's some sort of physics reason why this is an interesting thing to do, something about the second guy influencing the turns, I guess? But although it's a little hard to tell what's going on, the visual appeal of the sport proves to be exceptionally uninteresting. Well, so good thing there's a tawdry plot attached to all of this. See, Rommel's a simple guy. He's about to get married to Rita, and when he's not working in his garage, there's nothing he likes more than rolling in the hay with Rita. I mean, literally. Literally, they like to roll around in the dry California grass and bask in each other's company and dream about what their futures will bring. Sadly, what the future brings is JC and his groupies. JC is a charismatic motorcycle entertainer type. I think charismatic is the word we're supposed to use for guys like this. Guys who find people in bad situations, convert them into followers, and then are extremely demanding and abusive towards them. He's just awful. And he wants Rommel to fix his bike. It takes a few days for the bike to get repaired, and in the meantime, Rommel shows JC the joys of side hacking. And so JC decides he wants Rommel to join his traveling show. But Rommel's not interested. JC's girlfriend, Paisley, is kind of tired of JC's abuse and tries to seduce Rommel. But Rommel's not interested. Neither JC nor Paisley are accustomed to not getting what they want, so they decide the only thing to do is... hey, content warning. Turns out this movie has a lot of emotional abuse and sexual violence in it, and while Joel and the bots do a pretty good job editing around the worst of it and calling out what they have to leave in, we're still going to be discussing some very heavy topics today, so tap out if you need to. Anyway, Paisley gives JC the impression that Rommel has sexually assaulted her. So, to get revenge, JC and some of his men head out to the cabin where Rommel and Rita are having a nice evening, and they beat him unconscious, and then sexually assault Rita, and then murder her. Also, JC eventually kills Paisley for trying to leave him, which isn't edited out. Anyway, JC goes into hiding as the police chase him down, but Rommel wants to get his own revenge, and so Rommel hires some guys to help him take down JC, including a burly man known as Big Jake, but also some of JC's own henchmen, who are getting tired of his abuse. By the end of the siege, JC and Rommel are the only men standing. But as they fight, the cops arrive. Rommel decides to walk away and let the cops take care of it, which gives JC an opening to shoot Rommel dead. Then there's a flashback to Rommel and Rita rolling in the hay, and then the end.
Meanwhile, on the satellite of love, Joel is such a great parent. He's got a load of laundry in, he's given the bots a bath, he's about to put them down for the night, and, well, he still has to clean the loading pan bay of a bot-made mess. He may accuse the bots of just being overtired, but with that list, I don't know, as one parent to another, I see you, Joel. I know you're the one who's overtired. Parenting is rough. The Mads seem to be getting ready for their close-up before the invention exchange and, of course, ask Joel to go first. He has a day-glow sentient slinky named Gretchen, who has a super cute bit about the 60s. Dr. Forrester has made a slinky train for his body so that his front end and his back end can be in two different places at once. Joel accuses the Mads of stealing his ideas, but they respond that, well, of course they did. They are monitoring his mind because that's right, they're evil. Evil! After some bad movie, it's time for a music break. Now sing it, Joel. Side hacking is the thing to do, where it doesn't hurt to have a low IQ. Crow rules on the guitar, and Thomas slapping on the drums. Yeah! Why hasn't side hacking become the riveting, popular sport it ought? Well, the bots have some ideas about why. Missing a rudimentary interest factor, perhaps? But that's not the most egregious missing part. Nope, it's the terminology. How can a play-by-play catch your attention without some color commentary? So the side hacking reel begins again with Crow, Joel, and Tom Servo announcing the sport as it ought. Why, that team is doing the yank me, crank me. It's a spinning love funnel, and who wouldn't want to see that? It's frunky in this teenage wasteland. They're going to crinkle cut, and somebody's gonna have to pay. Perhaps the woozle, whose name is Peanut? Now, that sounds like a sport we'd all love to watch. At the next movie break, Joel and the bots start spreading the good news about Rommel, that magnificent bastard. Thankfully, Joel has read his book and made everyone super cool hats. But wait, Who could that be coming into range? Why, it's JC and Gooch. Or is it Cooch? They are impressed that the crew is watching Sidehackers. But why? Why'd you have to be like Rommel? I loved him. My own flesh I don't love better, JC says. So instead of bringing Joel and the bots back to Earth, JC and Gooch, or is it Cooch, they're off to go kill Rommel. They will. They will kill Rommel. They will. Movie's done, and we're left with a sense of dread. A movie about sidehacking, but then it gets padded out by all this killing. But no, that's not right, Joel says. He's got just the thing for us. A musical number, and it's perfect. Nothing lasts forever. Only love. Love pads the film. Tom and Crow take a verse. GPC joins in on tambourine and backing vocals. It's a love fest, everyone, because it's true. Only love pads the film. What do you think, sirs?
So, Sidehackers.
Sidehackers. Chris, I thought I was going to love this episode. I remember loving this episode. I remember thinking this episode was super fun and it was super lighthearted. I remembered your lips are drugged. And I remember the love patting the film and the fun segments, and I completely forgot about the movie. I forgot about the movie. It's so hard to watch. Oh my gosh. Did you have the same reaction when you were watching it?
I sort of did. I don't think I was as not into the episode as you were, but it was a much harder watch than I remembered it being.
Yeah.
And I guess it's just being older and taking a lot of the topics that the movie is dealing with. It's interesting. So as I think everybody knows, there's a big scene missing from the film, or a handful of scenes really, where Rita is assaulted and killed, and we get to see a montage of Rommel wandering around immediately after the event, where Joel and the bots are making jokes about how sad he is,
yes,
or how he's wandering around, and you have to really be committed to not taking the film seriously and finding it all wildly overdone for those jokes to properly hit.
Yeah.
Which I think I found a lot easier when I was younger than I do now.
Agreed.
But I also think they had already signed up for this film. They were sort of contractually obliged to do it. And that feels like one of the better ways of dealing with it. I don't know. There probably were other things that I would have still done differently, but I feel like they tried their hardest to frame it in a way that could make it as lighthearted as possible, let's say.
Well, I mean, the movie gives you such a dramatic shift in the way it's showing everything between the first 20 minutes where it's all about this awesome, cool new sport that everybody's learning about and trying out. And, you have this like kicky, fun love sequence and all that. And then you have JC join, and now it's all like abuse of women, abuse of people all around him. Now we have like violence, and it's not just like verbal violence, it's also physical violence. And then you have like this super dark thing that happens to Rita, and it continues being dark for like the rest of the movie until, I don't know what, Rommel is shot?
So audiences would have been a little bit more prepared for this because this is a biker film. And that's the sort of thing that happens in biker films. We'll talk more about this, I think, in our next couple episodes. But the biker film is one where violence erupts.
But like, not only do I remember Sidehackers being a super fun episode, I remember Wild Rebels being a super fun episode, which is going to be a part of our biker trilogy. Like, all of them I remember as being like fun watches. If you're telling me that I'm going to have to sit through this level of violence for another 2 episodes, this is not going to be the super fun trilogy that I thought it was going to be.
Spoiler alert, but Everybody Dies in Wild Rebels, if you remember that.
I don't. I just remember Wild Rebels cereal as a bit.
Yeah, I mean, not everybody dies, but quite a lot of people. It's a lot. Yeah, and that's sort of what the genre is promising. I mean, we'll talk about it a bit more later on, but it isn't quite as out of context as it seems here, I think.
There isn't that dramatic shift in tone for the movie that happens like a third of the way in.
You expect that. That's sort of part of the genre, I would think.
Okay.
But we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
I also want to say, I finally did it. I finally sat and watched the bits that are edited out.
Oh, Chris, you took one for the team. You do this all the time. Is there something
I suppose so.
Is there something that's in that our listeners need to know about, that I need to know about for this movie? Something that helps? Not helps?
I don't know if it helps. In some ways, I think it is arguably the most interesting part of the film.
Oh.
Not that it's good, or not that it isn't sort of prurient and being done for shock value and so forth. But okay, let me just describe it. It's not going to get into like tremendous amount of detail, but I will tell you what happens. So you might remember we cut to, after a commercial break, we cut to Rommel waking up and his face is all bloodied and he's been tied up and he breaks himself free from the ropes.
Yes.
In the version we see, he immediately sort of walks out of the cabin. But in the actual movie, he sees Rita's body.
Oh.
And it's sort of hanging. You see it from sort of the waist down, so you don't really get to see like how it's suspended, but it's hanging, and he gives it one final sort of tearful hug and then runs out.
Okay. Ugh. And it's implied that something horrible's happened to her, or do you actually see the scenes of the horrible things happening to her before Rommel wakes up?
You don't, but you might remember in the movie that we saw, he then runs, and there's a montage, and eventually he makes it to his friend, the guy who he runs the garage with. His friend's house, and his friend and his wife are there.
Yeah, and there's a super abrupt thing that happens in the version that we see, or that I saw, and clearly maybe not the one that you saw, where he comes in the house, and then the wife comes in, and then Rommel immediately runs out and hugs a tree, and it's really weird.
Yes, because that's where the important stuff is being cut.
Oh.
So what happens next is that while he's settling in and the wife is offering to, get him a sandwich or something, I forget.
Sure.
Their kids come downstairs, a boy and a girl.
Okay.
And they horseplay by the fireplace.
Okay. The way that kids do when they're playing in their own living room.
Exactly.
Sure. Okay.
The boy has his shirt off, which seems like an important detail. They're both about, 8 or 9 or somewhere around there, maybe a little younger. Who can tell? So the boy is sort of on top of the girl. They've been sort of wrestling and whatnot, and he's tickling her, basically. And she is smiling and laughing, but also trying to wriggle out from under him.
Sure.
And this sequence is cut with flashbacks of the assault.
Oh.
So he's seeing the boy sort of playing with the girl and being mean to her in a fun, friendly sibling way. And presumably. And it's reminding him of the assault that he apparently witnessed while he was tied up.
Holy crud.
And it's cut very fast, very sort of, MTV quick cuts, very shaky cam of all the footage, actually.
Oh my
it doesn't show as much as it implies, but it implies quite a lot.
Ugh.
Yeah, so that's what's cut. And they did the right thing by cutting it, even if they, probably shouldn't have done the movie at all.
Yeah, well, yeah.
I keep thinking about this scene now that I've seen it, though, because what? I guess I'm thinking about what is this movie about, and what is it trying to do? I don't want to give it too much credit, but some interesting things are going on here about how the movie understands heterosexuality
and the treatment of girls in general. I mean, I'm understanding from something that you're saying that it sounds like they're suggesting that it's not just something that adults do, but that this behavior begins with the way that girls are treated by their siblings and by boys in general.
Yeah, that seems like part of it. I mean, so we have Rommel, right, who is very strongly coded as living a standard middle American life. He's got a girl. He doesn't want to cheat on her. He's looking forward to settling down. He wants to stay romantic with her. He wants to keep rolling in the fields with her after they get married. He's got a friend who's married and got kids, and he's kind of jealous of the friend who's got this whole thing set up. That is what he is. He is doing what he should according to the 1950s, 60s American heterosexuality paradigm.
Which is what JC tells him, right? You're becoming a part of the establishment, but JC's spitting on that idea.
Exactly. JC's completely upending that. And he comes in as this malevolent force that's going to disrupt everything. And JC is, I'm going to use this word in a bad way, even though I don't typically use this word in a bad way. JC is a pervert. Mm-hmm. JC is perverting the order of things as the movie understands it should be, right?
And he's dressed as the typical hippie.
He's dressed as a typical hippie. He is vaguely effeminate, even though he does have at least one girlfriend, although there are other women hanging about him. Mm-hmm. He is itinerant. He is an entertainer. He is doing all of these things. And he's also got this weird cult of personality surrounding him.
Yes.
Where he's just awful to everybody around him, but they're compelled by it. And they're drawn into this seductive alternative lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he shows up one day and it causes trouble, right? It's a disruptive force that shows up on their front door.
But it seems like Rommel is resisting it the entire time, right?
Oh, yeah.
He wants to be friends with JC. He wants to hang out with JC and drink beers and introduce him to sidehacking, which, I don't know, sidehacking seems like it would be sort of subversive and countercultural as well, but apparently it isn't. Or maybe that's Rommel's I'm already a little bit off of the establishment path there. But he wants to be friends with JC without actually leaving and going on the circuit with him.
Yeah. And then the movie ends with Rommel dying, and we cut to this sort of idyllic scene of Rommel and Rita rolling in the hay, sort of forever in memory, as if this is a perfect encapsulation of a romantic but weirdly sexless heterosexuality. I mean, not totally sexless because they do make out, but it is that one scene where it gets more sexy, which is when the punishment, so to speak, happens, or when JC comes in. I don't know. I don't want to I don't know how much of this is intentional or what exactly they were thinking, but it's saying some really wild things about what, I don't know, about how you are to behave and what happens if you don't follow the normcore expectations of your society.
Are there more scenes inside of the longer version, uncut version of the movie of JC and Rommel becoming friends than what we see in the cut version we have?
Not especially. That's most of the cuts. There are a few other small ones that don't matter. One of the other more interesting cuts that we do still get to see is, you might remember there's a scene when JC gets very angry at Nero.
Yes.
And sort of assaults him.
Yes.
They cut the audio for that and they shout over it a bit because JC refers to Nero with the N-word.
Ooh.
Yep.
Oh, God.
They do leave in another word.
Oh, yes. In the joke telling?
In the joke telling, yeah. They leave in a slur for gay people in the joke telling, which Joel and the bots immediately try to drown out.
Yes.
They don't cut the audio. They leave it in there so that they can respond to it.
But thankfully not the N-word.
Yeah, it's a strategy that they use here, and I think it's fine, but it is a little bit startling.
Yeah, it is a very unexpected content to see in a Mystery Science Theater 3000 movie. Their movies just don't usually follow this track. And I guess I don't understand. I guess I don't understand why I had forgotten that from my initial viewings.
Yeah. And again, I think, if I had to guess, I would think it's just that we are older now and the discourse around these topics has changed a lot.
Very much,
and
yes.
While I don't think either of us would have sort of reveled in the sexual assault when we were teenagers or early 20s or whatever, and nevertheless, it is something that we take more seriously now.
Yes, that's true. Very true.
So, an interesting episode to watch for sure, but a hard one. And
yeah, unexpectedly so.
Yeah, and yet a really foundational one. There's so many bits from this episode that get called up again and again. The Chili Peppers Burn My Guts. We've got He Hit Big Jake. Only Love Pat's the Film. We've got all sorts of stuff.
Oh my gosh, which is the best. And the lips are drugged bit. Oh my gosh.
So that joke about the lips are drugged is one of my earliest memories of watching MST3K and falling in love with it. It was the scene where Ator comes out with his hand glider that he made real quick.
Oh.
That and that joke about your lips are drugged, which is such an unusual joke to make about that like camera going soft focus.
Yes.
It just reinterprets what's going on so vividly.
Yes.
And like once you know it, like, yeah, it becomes part and parcel of your film vocabulary, but it taught me that, right? It encouraged me to rethink about my positionality while watching films and while interpreting what's going on. Oh, it's such a good joke. It's such a solid moment and it just seems like a hard joke to write.
Yeah.
If you see what I mean. It either comes to you or it doesn't.
Yes. And it clearly came to them and it's so effective. It's so
good.
funny.
So let's talk a little bit about bikers.
Okay.
Because this is a film that has bikers in it.
It is. It's true.
So bikers ride motorcycles. You knew that.
I did.
Motorcycles were first invented in 1885 as kind of a fancy bicycle with an engine. They first went into mainstream production in 1894 and then first started scaring average Americans in 1947.
Oh, they must have scared us long before that.
Well, they might have, but that was when the big thing happened that started a lot of the fear of bikers in the American consciousness when the Hollister riot happened.
Oh my goodness.
Do you know about this?
I don't, but you're going to tell me about it.
I'll tell you a little bit about it. So this happened over July 4th weekend in Hollister, California. They were having a little bit of an event and more bikers showed up than expected. And they apparently made a bit more noise than anybody was expecting, and there were a lot of them, and that was scary.
Hold on. You're saying that the riot was just everybody being loud?
Yeah, a little bit loud and, like, unpredictable.
But not destructive in the way that we think of riots now with, like, looting and stuff.
Oh, maybe a trash can got dented or something. Like, there might have been some property destruction a little bit, but not, like... It's not like the town was burning or anything.
Sure. It's just, when I think of riots now, there have been several riots that have happened since 1947, most particularly ones that are connected to some sort of civil rights movement where it is that sort of violence and opportunistic choices that people make are blown way out of proportion and used in order to sell fear.
Yes. Well, guess what happened here? The San Francisco Chronicle got hold of the story, and then Life magazine picked it up.
Ooh.
And they ran a spread called Havoc in Hollister, calling the situation pandemonium and terrorism.
Oh my gosh.
I was reading up on it a bit more just to try to find out exactly what happened. One of the other things that the news media didn't mention in their attempts to make it seem as scary as possible is that there were a non-zero number of female bikers at the event as well. And we'll have a link in the show notes to somebody who studies female bikers and who uncovered the Tracy Gear Jammers who were at the event, who look amazing.
I believe it.
So it was a night, it was more bikers than expected at the party, and they were a little bit scary.
Sure.
And doesn't seem like it was a big deal, but it became a big thing in the press. It inspired a short story called Cyclists Raid by a guy named Frank Rooney, and also inspired a movie called The Wild One, starring Marlon Brando, which was the first biker film and really cemented a lot of the image in the popular imagination. We'll talk more about that next episode, I suspect.
I think we should. I mean, certainly that Marlon Brando built that image and it became a part of who he was, indeed.
Yes. Then there was a story in 1963 about bikers descending on a town called Porterville in California. And the story goes that the town fought back and kept thousands of bikers at bay. Everything about the story seems to be exaggerated.
Yeah, I would think so.
There definitely were some bikers who showed up and were turned around and were kind of grumpy about it. I don't think it was thousands, but yeah, it's hard to tell.
Yeah. It seems amazing because now, many years later, 80 years after that, there are whole organizations of people who have bikes and ride around together and go on vacations together and go camping together, simply because they love motorcycles. And, there are lots of signals between motorcyclists. Like I see them as a driver on the road when I'm behind somebody who's on a motorcycle and they see somebody who's on a motorcycle coming in the other direction. They always wave at each other.
Yeah.
I mean, so there's definitely like a collective positive feeling inside of that community about each other. I mean, I'm sure that there's also I know that there's some like animosity between people who have Harleys and people who have other bikes because, how hardcore are you? But whatever, I'm sure that's inside of every group that there's that you're not a real biker unless you blah, 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 blah. But
of course,
that's such a different press than what you're talking about. And I wonder what is the thing that has happened inside of those intervening years to change that press.
Well, I will tell you.
Good.
But first, things have to get a little bit worse for the public reputation of bikers.
All right, go ahead.
In 1965, the Attorney General of California put out a report about the Hells Angels, which he referred to as a hoodlum group, and basically made them sound like the worst threat to American values. People described it as a declaration of war on bikers from the state of California.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Now, I should say here, the Hells Angels have not been great, especially over the 70s and 80s. They ended up being tied to organized crime and everything that implies. And here in Canada, it's been argued that they are one of the largest organized crime syndicates around. We'll have a link in the show notes if you want to read up on the atrocities that they committed in Quebec in the 90s. It's not fun reading. But the charges in this 1965 report were incredibly trumped up. And of course, it's also worth remembering that not all biker groups are gangs, and not all biker gangs are the Hells Angels at their worst, even though a lot of the media surrounding this tried to make it seem like all bikers were this. Now, while bikers were, first becoming notorious over the late 50s into the 60s, a lot of other groups were becoming interested in them. In particular, a lot of countercultural groups got interested in them.
Yeah.
Right? Because bikers are like rebels and outlaws and countercultural in their way.
Sure. And at the same time that like California's going after the Hells Angels, they have motorcycle cops on the highways all the time.
Right.
My father was one.
Was he ever tempted to be a proper biker, so to speak?
I don't think he ever was. I mean, by the time my father was a motorcycle cop, he already was married and he already had kids. So he had already joined the establishment,
Well, yeah. I mean, my father was also a biker, but not a biker cop, a proper biker type. Mm-hmm. And while he didn't do much of that while, I was a kid and so forth, he spent a lot of his retirement involved in biker stuff.
Your father also has, like, when I think of a typical biker look, the long beard, the bandana, the sunglasses, like that sort of thing. Your father had that look, like he embraced that bikerness, which is awesome.
Yeah, no, he spent the last several decades of his life very much living that kind of lifestyle. So bikers were rebels and countercultural, and so other forms of countercultural cultures, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Started to make tentative alliances. So like the beatniks got very into bikers for a bit. The hippies got very into them. The lefty intelligentsia got really into bikers.
Oh.
They sort of read them as noble savages, to use the words of one cultural critic.
Stop. That's an awful way to refer to them.
Yeah, and I get the sense that sometimes the people who were into them did it with that kind of very patronizing approach.
When they were doing all of this, was it still seen as mainly a male version of the counterculture? Because I'm having a hard time seeing the feminism of the 70s embracing biker culture. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. It was because a lot of the bikers were veterans. Like biking in America got really popular because of veterans. And there were a lot of veterans coming back feeling disaffected, dealing with PTSD, looking for meaning, looking for adventure.
Looking for community.
Yeah, and biking offered that, which means that unlike the hippies and unlike the other countercultural groups, bikers are incredibly patriotic and often a lot more sort of conservative and right-wing in what they do. And a lot of those tentative alliances fell apart in the early 70s and very late 60s, early 70s, especially after Altamont, after that concert that the Rolling Stones and others put on in California, and they hired the Hells Angels as security, basically, and then that didn't work out. I mean, it was a whole mess for a lot of reasons, but people died. It was bad. Like one of the Hells Angels may have, perhaps accidentally, but maybe not, killed somebody, one of the attendees. And yeah, it became real rough. And this idea that they were actually quite violent and maybe not the kind of people we want to ally ourselves with grew more and more in some of the more lefty countercultural spaces, so that there was a huge break there.
At least with the Hells Angels contingency of bikers.
Especially with them. But that was sort of understood as what bikers writ large were like, you know? Harley Davidson also didn't really like this image of the rebels and the outlaws and the counterculture and so forth. And they spent a lot of time and energy, starting in the 60s, trying to make biking a bit more wholesome, to the point where they sponsored a TV show in 1969 called Then Came Bronson.
Oh.
Which is about a guy wandering around on his motorcycle and helping people out.
Oh. Harley Davidson going for the long-term cultural change right there.
Yeah. And then even more and more into the 80s, they tried to commodify the biker image into, let's make leather jackets exciting, even outside of biker culture. Let's divorce it from that kind of biker culture and the Hells Angels types, or even groups like what my father was part of.
Yeah.
Just have it be something cool and not part of, the more terrible meanings that have accrued, or, the terrible things that are happening as the Hells Angels are becoming more part of organized crime and the terrible things that are happening up in Canada. Instead, let's look at Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator in T2, sort of riding on the bike. He was the bad guy and now he's the hero,
Sure. Grease 2, or Grease, the first one as well. They're all on motorcycles.
Yeah. Is it wholesome?
No, I would not describe it as wholesome. However, there are two biker gangs, and one of them the movie is surely putting forth as a good guy group, and the other one is a bad guy group. So you have this idea, at least, that bikers are not all the bad guys. There's a way to be a bad guy biker, and generally it involves in being, ugly and pockmarked and things like that, right? Like when you have beautiful bikers, they're the good guys. I mean, that's how movies tell you that people are good, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I mean, it's a terrible way for movies to be putting images inside of your mind and letting you know, like, what good looks like and what bad looks like, but it's certainly something that movies are known to do.
I think that no one listening to this would be surprised to hear that I am not a biker. I don't even at all enjoy being on motorcycles. My father would try to take me out on his bike, and I hated it. I hated it so much.
That's so nice of him to have tried, though. Like, to share something of what he was really excited about with you. It's fine that you didn't love it, but, it's nice of him to at least tried.
Yeah, it maybe could have played out a bit better, but still,
Sure.
Yeah. No, I agree with what you're coming from. But that also means that I spent some time as a teenager and as an adult in biker spaces because of my father. And I have to say, while I'm not going to vouch for everything that was going on in every bit of that space or every political thought that bikers had in their head, or the both bikers that I met.
Sure.
Overall, they were doing good things. They were mostly, it seemed, planning events and having whip rounds when somebody that they knew in the community needed something. Let's get this family a new refrigerator. Their refrigerator broke down. It's going to cost this much to get. We found a used refrigerator. We can get them. It's going to cost this much. We're going to pass the hat. Oh, it looks like we've come in with 1.5 times what we were asking for by everybody pitching in $5. It was doing good work. My father ran a Santa run, giving presents to needy kids.
Aww.
This is the stuff that I most associate with bikers nowadays. It's really different. And again, I'm not trying to I'm not saying it's a monoculture, and I'm not saying there aren't any problematic things.
Of course not.
But, it's more complicated than the Hells Angels story that we got from the media in the 60s painted it out to be.
There are other biker communities out there, though, Chris. There's a Sidehacker community. Well, not a Sidehacker community per se, though, more like a sidecar community within the biker community.
Okay, go on.
Well, you'll remember in the movie that we watched, they had a special thanks to the Southern California Sidehack Association.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I was trying to do is to track down what happened to that group, because I mean, I know Joel says it's really interesting to see the humble origins of this very popular sport. No, like other than this movie, what the heck happened to side hacking? So I tried to track these people down.
Okay. What did you find?
So the California Sidehack Association was an officially registered nonprofit, but it disbanded in 1983.
Okay. That makes sense, I guess.
Well, I guess I'm kind of surprised it lasted that long, except that it seems like its main focus as an association wasn't necessarily racing the way that Rommel and his friends do inside of this movie. It was more of a sidecar association than a side hack association.
Well, so interestingly, sidehack is just another term for a sidecar.
Yes, so that you could have a companion riding with you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, this side hack that they've created is specifically for this racing, but the Side Hack Association wasn't only focused on racing and wasn't only focused on this specific kind of side hack. It was a sidecar association. So it seems like sidecar associations are what have happened since then. Like it's changed the name to be sidecar, and many of the associations are now more family-oriented than they are racing-oriented.
Interesting.
So, yes, they sponsor races. They sponsor races that are like on regular roads, but also off roads like we see inside of this movie. But a lot of them are bringing together family events where you can go riding with your family, with other families or other groups, and you're going to head out somewhere and go camping for a couple of days.
I mean, there's nothing cooler than a little kid wearing goggles and a helmet sitting in a sidecar.
There's one thing cooler, a dog.
Okay, a dog wearing a helmet and goggles sitting in a sidecar
Seriously,
is pretty great.
it is really
I guess a cat
great.
would also be pretty good, but that would be hard to pull off.
That would be really hard to pull off. I don't see a cat doing that.
Penguin would be good. But you know what? If you want to do a little side hacking of your own, you can find people who are still doing side hack style racing in side hack style motorcycles because it's huge in Europe.
It's huge in Canada, too, where you're right now.
No, it's certainly not huge.
Oh,
I can tell
okay.
you that much.
Huge is kind of a relative thing. But the one of the things that I found associated with the Southern California Side Hack Association was sponsored races where people came from the Sidecar Association of Canada. And if you look at their website, they have a front page with pictures of motorcycles with sidecars that almost look like they're Formula One racing cars. And the person who's in the sidecar is doing the things that Rommel's doing in this movie. They're leaning over behind the driver or leaning in the opposite direction of the driver as they're going into turns in order to balance out the bike. And so it looks like nothing that I could find when I was looking for stuff through Southern California showed the kind of racing that we saw in this movie. But the Sidecar Association of Canada looks like they're still racing Rommel style.
Well, if you want to find footage of people racing Rommel style, the term you want to look for is sidecar cross.
Ooh.
So it's like motocross, which is sort of European motorcycle racing. And if you search YouTube for sidecar cross, you'll find all sorts of people doing the Rommel thing. It existed before Sidehackers, the film.
Which is not surprising.
And it continues to exist just fine in the decades since. It didn't take off in America. This was shocking to me when I found this out the other day because I grew up with the movie Sidehackers. And I thought, oh, side hacking, that was a thing that they tried out briefly and didn't go anywhere. And I feel like all the MST3K focused content I've ever seen agreed with that. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, I kept digging and digging until I found that term sidecar cross. And lo and behold, nope, by a slightly different name, it has totally existed all this time and it's doing fine thing. It's not like the most popular thing ever, but it's an absolutely common and valid alternative to motocross or variant of motocross. So it totally exists. We've just talked ourselves into a corner by insisting it's a California thing, which it kind of isn't.
I mean, considering when I lived in California as a kid, I went to Hollister. I went to Hollister with my friend's older brother and a big group of families to do motorcycle riding and to do, like, I don't know if he motocross raced or whatever, but there were no sidecars at the place that we went to. So it seems like we really focused on being on two wheels instead of being on three.
I will say I watched a sidecar cross competition on YouTube. Plenty of them show up. It was incredibly boring.
Oh, well, that's not your bag. I'm sure you don't watch the Indy 500 or NASCAR either.
No, that's true. But also, they don't kick up quite as much dust as sidecar cross did, at least in the video I saw. So, like, immediately everything was obscured. And I guess because of the nature of sidecar biking, like, it felt like the motorcycles were all going real slow.
Oh, well, I mean, does it look like Rommel's going all that fast, other than the fact that there's a whole bunch of dust?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, none of this looks at all appealing. It does not have any televisual appeal.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's why they never came up with the terminology that made this whole sport become super famous. You know, here in America, we like our color commentary.
Yeah. It turns out it's all in French.
Hey, everybody, it's time for the Shallow 13.
It's time for the Shallow 13. 13 gut-burning tidbits about today's experiment, the Sidehackers. Go, Charlotte, go!
What's the name of this movie anyway? The title card calls it The Sidehackers, 3 words, but the posters all call it The Sidehackers, 2 words. But some sources say it also went by 5 the hard way.
5 the Hard Way was also the name of the song that plays over the opening credits, performed by the band The New Life. The New Life were based out of Fresno, California, and the one LP they released was, yep, the soundtrack to Sidehackers, which apparently actually got released as a soundtrack. And also, they put out a bunch of singles from it? Huh. Well, we'll have a link in the show notes if you want to listen.
Let's sneak in a few familiar faces. Ross Hagen stars as Rommel. Hagen spent much of the 60s in biker films, including The Sidehackers, The Hellcats, which we'll get to in a few episodes, and The Miniskirt Mob, in which he and his new bride are tormented by an all-female gang. That film's tagline? They play around with murder like they play around with men.
Hagen had a long, if not especially illustrious career, but it was capped with a 2010 role in the video game Red Dead Redemption. Hagen died the following year, and so in tribute to him, the game's massively popular sequel, Red Dead Redemption 2, includes a mountain named Mount Hagen.
Oh, hey, turns out the leader of the gang harassing Ross Hagen and his wife in the Miniskirt Mob is played by Diane McBain, who plays Rita, Ross's fiancée in The Sidehackers. Anyway, keep an eye out for her the next time you watch the classic 60s Batman show. She appears in a few episodes as the socialite Pinky Pinkston.
The Sidehackers' baddie, JC, is played by Michael Pataki, who has also had a long career in the business, straddling from an appearance as the Klingon officer Korax in the original series Star Trek episode The Trouble with Tribbles, and as the voice of George Licker in Ren and Stimpy. Oh, and we'll also be seeing him again when we cover the KTMA episode Superdome.
Another familiar face you might see in the film is that of Goldie Hawn. Maybe. Apparently she's one of the spectators in the racing scenes, but if she is, I haven't spotted her. But why would one of the stars of Laugh-In take some time off to be an extra in this biker film? Well, turns out she was recently married to the film's director, Gus Triconis.
Gus Triconis was a dancer before he started making films with Roger Corman, and in fact, he appears as Indio, one of the sharks in West Side Story. Which means, yes, next time you watch West Side Story, keep an eye out for the future director of The Sidehackers dance fighting against the future director of Space Mutiny.
Oh, also, Gus Triconis directed a 1975 film called Supercock. which for some reason we thought you'd want to know about. It stars Russ Hagen and Nancy Kwan. It was filmed in the Philippines, and it's about cockfighting. So if you wanted a little more beyond Atlantis in your Sidehackers, you know where to look.
Let's finish off with a few references. When the title credits for the film's editor, Pat Somerset, appear on the screen, Tom riffs,
Pat Somerset Mom. That's what Noel Coward used to do.
W. Somerset Maugham and Noel Coward were both English playwrights in the early 20th century, though nowadays Maugham is more famous for novels like Of Human Bondage. Oh, and they were friends. Oh, and they were both gay. That's sort of important if you want to understand Tom's little joke there.
Right before the episode began, Joel had given the bots a bath, which sounds kind of dangerous, but I guess he knows what he's doing. Anyway, we open with Joel vigorously toweling Tom dry.
See, this is a Dutch Navy rub to kind of give you the service.
A Dutch rub is another term for a noogie. You know, rubbing somebody's head with your knuckles as a mean prank. But we couldn't find anyone else saying it had anything to do with the Dutch Navy.
JC enters Rommel's garage, and Tom quips,
He looks like Bud Freeman. I hope he doesn't try to hug everybody.
Bud Friedman was the founder of the Improvisation Comedy Club, better known as the Improv. The Improv is one of the most famous stand-up comedy venues, and especially became so after the TV series An Evening at the Improv began in 1982. And I guess the MST3K crew found the guy to be a little too huggy.
And finally, when Rommel and Rita are making out, Crow says,
At least you're more than that.
A nice vaccination scar.
So for our younger listeners, there used to be this disease called smallpox, and it killed a lot of people, several 100 million people in the 20th century alone. But we found a vaccine for it and completely eradicated it by the 1970s. Yay! The vaccine sometimes left a small circular scar at the injection site on your upper arm, which is what Rommel has on display in this scene, though actually I can't make out any scar on his arm.
And that's time.
Wow. Rommel, you magnificent bastard. I read your book!
Did you? Did you read his book?
No, in fact, I did not read his book, but I sort of saw the movie.
Okay, well, I sort of read the book, or at least like 2 or 3 pages of it.
This is going to be a great segment. I sort of watched a movie. You sort of read a book.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about this. Who is Rommel?
Rommel was one of the generals inside of the German army in World War II, and he wrote a book called A Tank in the Attack, or something similar to that. You had it translated slightly differently for the title.
Well, he wrote a few books, I think. The translation that I most often saw for his most famous book was called Infantry Attacks, sometimes just called Attacks, and it is about his experiences as an officer during World War I. It's sort of his diary of the events of the battles that he experienced. Mm-hmm. The first one, at least in the translation that I've got here, is Ulm, July 31st, 1914. The danger of war hung ominously over the German nation. Everywhere, serious, troubled faces.
Wow.
Etc. It's very much like that. And then he tells his story about what he was doing that day and all the stuff that happens. And then about the fight that he went into. And then it ends with this little, like, Aesop's Fable-esque moral of observations. Facing the enemy, the reconnaissance detachment commander becomes conscious of his heavy responsibilities. Every mistake means casualties, perhaps the lives of his men. Therefore, any advance must be made with extreme caution and deliberation, etc., etc. It's like you get a bit of the story, and then you get like a bit of military pearl of wisdom from what he experienced. And it seems like, if you were interested in that sort of thing, it would be a pretty compelling read. I am not. Yeah. So I didn't go too far into it, but I can absolutely see why the book had its fans. And apparently, one of those fans was a guy they made a movie about.
Yes, that's right, Chris. I feel like we have ChatGPT writing our script right now. That's right, Chris. So I watched the movie called Patton, and inside of the movie Patton, and it actually happens inside of like the first 30 minutes for those of you who are interested in seeing the big reference that they're making all the time inside of Sidehackers. They have a scene where they wake up Patton in the middle of the night, and on his bedside table are 2 books, the Bible, of course. And the second one is A Tank in Attack by Rommel. And they head out to see a large contingency of tanks running through a particular region in Tunisia with a bunch of people behind the tanks, infantrymen. And Patton has all of his forces in hiding locations, covered with camouflage. And they just start firing. And it's like for freaking ever. It's like an hour. It's not an hour. It's like 5 minutes of just tanks blowing up and people jumping out of the way and dying and all that. And of course, George C. Scott, who's playing Patton, says, "Rommel, you magnificent bastard, I read your book." That's what they're referencing inside of the MST3K episode.
So I read the wrong book. Tank Attacks is the sequel, it turns out, to Infantry Attacks.
And apparently is the one that gave Patton all the secrets he needed to, quote, defeat Rommel. So, there's that. Though apparently Rommel, at least in the movie, was not directly involved with that attack. He came up with the plan and then, went back to Germany because he got sick or something. I don't know. Patton was apparently really upset that he didn't defeat Rommel personally, just forces following his order and, had to be assured in the way that you assure divas that they're amazing, that in fact, by defeating Rommel's plan, he was defeating Rommel.
So I've never seen the film Patton, but it won Best Picture in 1970. I know that. So how was it?
So it's, I should say, as you are not into reading books about war and military strategies, I am not also into movies about World War II or about wars in general. And this one seemed to be one that very much glorified the man and glorified the war. And they defend that by saying that Patton himself glorified war, like found great glory in that as an act and an activity. So it was not my bag. I had a really hard time watching it. And he's a very difficult character to like because he is all about military strategy. He's all about his own success. He's all about beating other generals to glory. And they don't gloss over the fact that Patton thought that people who had nerves and who couldn't be on the battlefield and had severe PTSD, he didn't think any of that was real. He thought it was people being cowards and being yellow, and he yelled at people and he got reprimanded for it. And they have that in the movie. It's a lot. I mean, especially with where we are socially now, and our beliefs and just the horrors of war. We wouldn't be discounting something like that anymore, but it was certainly something that he did, and very publicly. So I was pleased that that was in the movie because it wasn't treated as something that was a positive aspect of him, but it was still really hard to watch.
If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you're a hacker on the side, or if you'd like to ask us anything, get in touch with us. Our website is itsjustashow.com, and you can still reach us on Twitter at itisjustashow. We'd love to hear from you. This show is made possible by listeners like you, and like our randomly selected supporter, Patrick. Thank you, Patrick. For as little as $1 an episode, you can be like Patrick and help us research and record this show. And you can join us in a friendly Discord. And you can listen to all our superfan bonus bits. Find out more at itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And if you want to follow up with anything that was mentioned today, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/135.
We've already hinted at what we're watching next, Chris, but let's share with our audience.
It's Season 2, Episode 7, Wild Rebels, Crunchy Munchy Rebels. Eat 'em up, don't put 'em down, they're wild.
So I'll be looking forward to that bit. And now that I'm warned about how biker movies are supposed to go, maybe I can take the proper grain of salt to prepare myself. And hopefully our listeners do too.
Yes, I have not watched it too recently. but I do not remember it being nearly as traumatic as the Sidehackers can be.
Oh my gosh, Chris, I didn't remember the Sidehackers was going to be traumatic, so...
Yeah, no, there's definitely some stuff in it.
Yeah, so be it.
But until then...
Help! I'm sidehacking, and I can't get up.
Hi. Why, yes I am. I'm on a ladder. Take it away, Theme Squad.
No, I would not describe it as wholesome